This is a short, to the point COVID travel requirements guide to come to Jamaica in 2022. My very first video on this channel was precisely that, COVID travel update. And here we are, 2 years later, and it is still as relevant as ever. What changed though is that a lot of people realized that if they are waiting to travel when COVID is over, they might be waiting for another 5 years, maybe 10 years. So instead, they got vaccinated and went on holidays. As a result, this winter season saw record numbers of travelers in the last few years. And according to Forbes, Jamaica topped the list of preferred travel destinations. So if you're also among the people who want to come to Jamaica in 2022, this video is for you. We shall start with the current travel requirements, that there have been quite a few changes. And at the end of the video, I will also address the situation with COVID cases going up and down to understand what's actually going on. And please make sure to check the pinned comment under the video to see if there are any updates to the information that you're going to hear now. So first, the official website. Yes, Jamaica is open for travel. There are no lockdowns. But before you travel to Jamaica, step number 1 is to go to the official government website for visitors that has all the Jamaica travel information. It's called visitjamaica.com travel authorization. It is being updated all the time, so make sure to check it now and then once again the day before you travel, just in case. You must fill out a travel authorization form online on that website within 7 days before your intended travel date and wait until it gets approved. Just select whether you live in Jamaica and the site will take you to the correct page. Most applications of non-residents are processed within 5 minutes of applying, but if you are a resident, sometimes it takes a bit longer, like up to 24 hours to get a reply. If you don't receive a response within a few days, you can use a direct contact form on the front page of the official website. Just scroll down until you see need support. It is important to fill out one travel authorization form per person, not one per family. A travel authorization is not required to book your flight. It is, however, a requirement for check-in and boarding, and airlines will not allow passengers to board without it. So keep the electronic version with you at all times. Note to cruise ship passengers. Disembarking cruise ship passengers do not require travel authorization, but they will need a COVID test as everyone else. All travelers to Jamaica 12 years and older have to do a COVID test, regardless if they have been vaccinated or not. Fully vaccinated travelers do have bonuses, but we'll talk about them later. Accepted test types are here. Antigen is the cheapest and fastest. Takes like 15 minutes to get results. And yes, antigen test is accepted. Doesn't have to be a PCR. The date of the sample collection must be within 3 days of the travel date. And this is another common problem people encounter. They simply take tests too early, and by the time they come to the airport, it's already invalid. So to make sure there is no confusion, simply use the test date calculator on the official website. Input your arrival date in Jamaica and it will show you what's the earliest day when you can take the test. You don't need to upload your test results. You don't need them when you're booking a flight. You will only need to show them at the check-in desk and when boarding a flight. There are no travel bans, so anyone from any country can travel to Jamaica. But keep in mind that rules can change, so just check the pinned comment under this video where I will be adding any updates if they come up. There are areas where you can freely travel in Jamaica from day one. They're called resilient corridors, which include all north coast of Jamaica, a large part of the south coast of Jamaica, and now also the so-called Kingston Resort area, which comprises of certain accommodations and attractions. And you can find the link to them in the description. These are pretty much all the areas where tourists usually go anyway. You can travel between resilient corridors without any problems, but if you want to visit a place outside of resilient corridor, say Blue Mountains, you can do that too, but certain conditions apply. The main one is to do with the quarantine. From the start of the pandemic, everybody coming to Jamaica, vaccinated or not, had to quarantine regardless of where they were staying, resorts, Airbnbs, private residence. Now, fully vaccinated travelers who have a negative PCR test taken within 3 days of departure to Jamaica are not required to quarantine. This means that as soon as you arrive in Jamaica, you can go anywhere you want, including outside of Resilient Corridor, like Blue Mountains. If that's what you want and you're fully vaccinated, just have a negative PCR test and you're good to go. If you're not planning to go outside of resilient corridor, like most tourists don't, then take an antigen test, cheaper, faster and easier, and then you can just stay in the so-called quarantine. You see, quarantine doesn't actually mean that you have to isolate yourself. While in quarantine, you can still visit all the attractions, restaurants and shops and have your usual vacation in Jamaica, provided you're doing it within the resilient corridors. Recently, there were also accommodations and attractions outside of resilient corridors that were added to the list of approved places, and you can visit them as well while in quarantine. You can see the list of these approved places on the official website. While in quarantine, you can rent a car and drive yourself, or you can use a private taxi. However, you cannot use route taxis or other forms of public transport while in quarantine. All of these restrictions apply for only first 8 days if you're fully vaccinated, or for 14 days if you're not vaccinated. It doesn't mean that you have to come for the whole 14 days. You can come just for 1 day if you want. You can then just leave. So basically the main difference now between a quarantine and no quarantine is that in quarantine you shouldn't be using public transport and you shouldn't be visiting certain residential areas. But let's say you're Jamaican and you're coming back home from a trip, or you're visiting your relatives in residential areas that are outside of resilient corridors. Just take a PCR test before traveling to Jamaica and you can skip the quarantine and visit your relatives. So the rules now are built in such a way that they protect Jamaicans from the spread of COVID among the locals, and at the same time they allow travelers to enjoy the trip fully. You don't have to wear a mask outside in the street in Jamaica, but you will have to wear a mask in transport or when you are inside of a public place like the supermarket or the airport. It is also advised to keep the 6 feet distance and wear a mask when talking to people. The curfew hours have been relaxed even more, so now they're the same for all days from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. During the curfew hours, you shouldn't be in the street. But if you have to travel at night between your accommodation and the airport, or if you need to relocate from one accommodation to the other, you can do so even during curfew hours. Accommodation. If you go to the official website, there is a list of so-called COVID-19 protocol compliant approved listings. And it is designed to encourage guests to choose accommodation from this list. But it doesn't mean that you have to. You can choose any accommodation you want anywhere in Jamaica, including Airbnbs, families and friends, even if they are outside of the resilient corridor. If you don't see your accommodation in the list, simply select private home and get the address with a pin on the map. Accommodation choice doesn't influence the approval of your travel authorization, but it does influence the kind of form you receive as a result. If you select accommodation from the approved listings, it will give you a form that says that you have to stay within resilient corridor. If you select private home, you will get Form B that says home quarantine order, which makes it sound as if you have to isolate, which you don't. If you read the form in detail, it tells you to isolate only if you have COVID symptoms. But if you don't have COVID symptoms, you can travel within resilient corridor, visit attractions, shops, and so on. Basically do the same as guests who stay in resorts and other tourist board licensed accommodations. If you have to stay in several accommodations during your trip, when you're filling out your travel authorization form, just add accommodation where you're going to stay first once you arrive. And that's it. You don't need to add all the other ones. There are plenty of places in Jamaica where you can do a COVID test before your return flight home, and the test prices were reduced significantly, at least at some places. The antigen tests costs between $30 to $35 now instead of the former $50, while PCR test is between $75 to $100 instead of the former $150. Some hotels in Jamaica offer test services on the property, but please keep in mind that these can attract an extra fee, so check first with them. The video description has a link to all test centers in Jamaica, and as a backup plan, Montego Bay Airport itself has a test center available for you. In general, antigen test results there take about 15 minutes to be ready, but the lines can take some time. So just to make sure, if you wish to do a test at the airport, come around 3 to 4 hours before your flight. An antigen test is a good, cheap option for the US, but if you're going to Canada, however, their government requires PCR test only, and the results will take up to 24 hours. So the airport option is not for you. Now, what if you are at the airport in Jamaica, ready to leave to go home, and your COVID test comes back positive? Can you still leave? No. You will have to extend your stay in Jamaica and isolate yourself during these days. How many days? It will depend on several factors. One of them is whether you have symptoms or not. If you do have symptoms and you got positive test results, the lab and the resort will report to the Ministry of Health. There are special places designated for isolation. Some resorts will also have rooms for isolation, and they will also advise you on where to get medical help in case it is required. There is also COVID HELPLINE in Jamaica, which you can call to reach the Ministry of Health right away, and they will help you with all the questions you might have. If you test positive for COVID and you do not have any symptoms, you still have to isolate. But again, just contact your resort or your Airbnb host and they should be able to accommodate you for isolation. But what's different here is that fully vaccinated people who test positive for COVID but have no symptoms can do another PCR test 5 days after they were first tested positive for COVID. And if it turns out negative, they can just go home. If it's still positive, they have to wait until day 10. And if it's negative, they fly home. And if it's still positive, they wait until day 14. And if the test is still positive, even on day 14, they can call COVID HELPLINE and the Ministry of Health will email them a quarantine release form and they can go home, even if their test is positive. And this is because on day 14, they're no longer contagious. So all of this is a rare situation considering the number of people traveling, but I thought I would mention it here so people would know what to expect. So to wrap it up, it might seem like a lot of rules, but this is only because I'm very detailed and trying to cover all the important questions. But in short, all visitors who come to Jamaica have to fill out a travel authorization form per person within 7 days of travel and do a COVID test within 3 days before they travel, either antigen or PCR. Then they can just enjoy their trip, and then before they leave Jamaica, they have to do their COVID test again. That's it. These rules and regulations are not complicated, but what visitors should really think about is to make sure they follow them to minimize the risk of COVID transmission to the locals and other travelers. But is it safe to travel to Jamaica right now? If you look at the number of COVID cases in the world, they are higher than ever before. But at the same time, the daily number of people who die from COVID has been decreasing. What's happening? Well, a few things. The number of people who travel around the world went up rapidly. And it doesn't just mean that they can spread COVID more. What it actually means is that they get tested more because a lot of countries, including the US, require COVID tests prior to arriving. So let's say there is 1 million people who have COVID but no COVID symptoms. How would anyone know they have COVID? They wouldn't. So they're not added to the statistics. But then suddenly Christmas comes, and that 1 million people decide to travel. All of them do a test, and it turns out they're positive with COVID. The reason why there is such a high spike of COVID cases is because before we had been mostly testing people who had symptoms, and now we're testing everybody. Okay, everybody who travels. So obviously, they are added to the statistics of daily COVID cases, but not the daily deaths, because these positive COVID people have no symptoms and feeling fine. So all of this drama in the media, especially in the US, especially with Omicron variant, when journalists leave out the facts that I've just mentioned, creates just more stress and causes misunderstanding, as if we don't have enough stress already. Having said all that, the United States is the leading country with a number of COVID cases in the world. And here is the second point I'd like to mention. The US government, the Department of State, keeps adding countries to their list as dangerous ones for travel because of COVID. So basically, the US, with almost 200,000 cases per 1 million population, is adding Jamaica as the dangerous one because of COVID, even though Jamaica has 5 times less cases per 1 million population than the US. Statistically, if you live in the United States, it is safer for you to leave and travel all around the world than to simply stay home. Your trip can be dangerous to people of other countries, though, and that's why the measures are in place. But when the Department of State keeps giving travel warnings about going to other countries, I'm sorry, but when it comes to COVID, it's your country that is dangerous to the rest of the world, not the other way around. And the last but not least, people still don't understand how vaccines work. And I'm not talking about people who are against the vaccines. That's a different topic, and I'm not touching upon this now because this video is not about that. I'm talking about people who support the vaccines and are vaccinated. Some of them think that vaccines protect everyone from COVID, and hence they ask questions. If I'm vaccinated, why do I still have to do the test? I've seen people who don't wear a mask and don't keep the distance and go like, it's okay, I'm vaccinated. Let me just remind the basics that all of us should know by now, especially if we want to travel. The vaccines do not protect people from contracting a virus. They teach our immune system what to do with the virus once we get it, or if we get it. The reason we see a lot less people dying from COVID now, even though cases are going up, is because a lot of these people are vaccinated. So their immune system kills the virus before it can do any harm to them. The bottom line, while vaccinated, you can still get COVID and transmit it to others. Your vaccine protects you from developing a disease and dying from COVID, but your vaccine, doesn't protect others from contracting the virus from you if you have it. That's why I wear a mask and keep distance. Not because I want to protect myself, but because I want to protect others in case I have COVID without realizing it. I hope this clarifies the situation a little bit more. Anyway, this channel is about Jamaica after all, and this episode is not designed to encourage or discourage from traveling. It is created to cover the current situation and help visitors to make a better, informative decision about their trip to Jamaica. That's it for today. Remember to check the pinned comment under this video for latest updates. And if you have found this video useful, don't forget to give it a like and share it with someone who might need it. Please don't forget to check my channel for recent videos. I've published a few of them during the weekdays, which you might have missed. Thanks to all the subscribers and all the patrons who support this channel. Without you, my work wouldn't be possible. If you wish to join our team of patrons, you can do so by following the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Irina, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.